Creativity, Thinking, and Education podcast with your host, Patricia Rose Upsack.
We're very, very pleased to welcome Dr. Jacob Liberman, who is a pioneer in the fields of light, vision, and consciousness, and the author of Light Medicine of the Future, Take Off Your Glasses and See, and The Wisdom from an Empty Mind. He has shared his discoveries and insights with more than 2,000 audiences worldwide and has been enthusiastically endorsed by luminaries in the field of health, science, and spirituality, including Deepak Chopra, Louise Hay, Bruce Lipton, Jean Houston, and Eckhart Tolle. Gary Zukav describes Jacob's work as deeply transformational, and Jean Houston said that it is a manual for a whole new order of being. And Louise Hay says Jacob Liberman is one of my favorite authors. So welcome, Dr. Jacob Liberman.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you today.
So the conference is called Creativity, Thinking, and Education. But as you and I were just discussing, we may not even, everything is connected to creativity and thinking. And education is, of course, one of my big things because I was a teacher for 23 years. But I think life is an education. So I really am not going to hold to anything specific except for that I love that one of the things we were talking about is that you have had a lot of direct experiences in your life. So I thought first if you could just tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, very brief, and then maybe we could talk about a few of your direct experiences.
Sure. Since the title is Creativity, Thinking, and Education, I think the first thing that I'd like to share is that I was a child with what people would call a learning problem. I had difficulty with reading. It was difficult for me to read for any length of time without falling asleep. Uh-huh. And because of that, I became, I would be called a non-reader. In addition, I wasn't born in the U.S. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and when I came to the U.S., there weren't any Spanish-speaking people here. And so English was my third language rather than my first. So between that and the fact that reading was not, let's just say that my way of learning, the way I naturally learn, is different than by trying to transform symbols on a page into a living experience.
Right.
My way of learning is through direct experience in my life, by having an experience that profoundly affects me. The reason I'm thrilled to speak with you and specifically interested in the title of this summit or conference is because I spent many years of my life working with thousands of young people who were diagnosed as having dyslexia or difficulty reading or learning disabilities and so on. And what
this is fascinating because I know you don't know this. I started a program in Boulder in a high school in 1975 for learning disabled adolescents, and I taught there for 23 years.
Yeah, well, this was the essence of what I did between 1971 and the mid-'80s. It began with kids that had learning difficulties, and then I began working with their parents, and then I began working with pro and Olympic athletes, and it was all about how do we tap into our maximum potential. And it came to me because I realized that these kids, for the most part, did not have a reading problem or a learning problem. It's just that their nature was a little different than the average person, and they learned in a different way. And so what I realize is that in the school system, we never guide children in the art of learning how to learn without effort. Everything is about memorization, but we don't actually delve into what is required so that learning occurs without any effort, because our physical beings, our mind, our brain, and so on, is literally like a radar screen that's continually learning. It's continually interacting with things, and it's continually expanding its repertoire of knowledge and knowing and information.
Right.
And so I spent years developing approaches that would allow children to begin to notice how their habitual way of seeing and responding to situations actually impeded their ability to achieve the goals they were looking for. That so much of our inability to, quote, get the right answer is based on the fact that we are designed to look for the answer rather than recognizing that the answer is looking for us.
Ooh, I like
Let me explain what I mean by that. We believe that the eyes are designed to look, but they're not. They're designed to see. The eyes look for nothing until something catches them. That's why we say, oh, it caught my eye.
Uh-huh.
But we never bother to ask, what is the it? What is the it that grabs the attention of the eye, causing the eye to reflexively look toward it? Then the body reorients itself, and then that which was looking for us, which caught our eye, actually becomes the sign that says this is the next piece of your life's curriculum. And so what I've come to realize is that the whole anatomy of the eye is designed to perceive the formless before it is rendered into form. In other words, we are literally designed to respond to input that is truly invisible. We know that the eye interacts with light. Most people don't realize that light is totally invisible. That's why physicists say the foundational energy of everything that exists, the vibration that underlies everything, is what we call light. But light cannot be seen. What we experience that we think is light is actually brightness. The light itself is invisible. And the light is something that is what we call photons. Photons are totally invisible, can never be magnified enough to be seen. They have no attributes. And so when you look at the eye, you think the eye is designed to see a tree or a person. But what we know scientifically is that the eye responds to as few as 3 photons of light. Now, photons are not material, which essentially means that we are designed to respond to those very subtle, to the very subtle guidance of life that is moving us from place to place. Let me explain a little bit more. We know that the planets orbit around the sun.
Right.
What is it that animates the movement of those planets? What animates the movement of the oceans, the transitioning of the seasons throughout the year? What animates the movement of all of that? Because what animates that is also animating and breathing life into us. We assume that the environment is this thing outside of us. We think we are living life, but in fact, we are nature. We are life itself. And so what is animating everything else is also animating us. We do not breathe on our own. Something is literally breathing us. Something is pumping our hearts. When we begin to realize that something keeps everything in its life's orbit, we begin to realize that life is also looking for us and is also moving us always towards our own orbit. And what I realized with children that were diagnosed and labeled as having learning problems is when they began to see that their effort to learn, their thinking ahead, which is not actually thinking at all, it's actually worrying, that when they began to see that each time they tried to figure it out ahead of time, it collapsed their breathing. And each time they collapsed their breathing, it obscured everything that they were looking for. And so they began to discover through their own direct experience that merely by just breathing and having fun, the answer, even to very complex issues, came to them free of charge. I noticed the same thing with eyesight. I would take people through experiences, people who wore fairly thick glasses, and I would put some on the blackboard and I would say, take off your glasses, stand as close as you need to the blackboard so you can see what we're doing. And they'd maybe stand 2 or 3 feet away. Each time they were able to drop in a little deeper, notice all of the part of them that wants to get it right, the part that's thinking ahead, the part that's continually worrying inside about getting the right answer. When they began to see what exactly was happening, that awareness became curative. It instantaneously changed the wiring of the brain, and then it allowed what we call creativity to continually funnel up, like the energy coming through a volcano, just the way life erupts. And every time they'd have an insight, I'd say, okay, take a step back. I remember one young lady, I was doing a workshop in Boulder, Colorado in the 90s, and one of the participants...
That's 20 miles away from me.
Yeah, one of the participants was wearing a strong pair of glasses. I asked her to stand in front of this chart at whatever, distance she felt comfortable, which was 2 feet. Within about 20 minutes, every time she had an insight, she moved back a step. Each time she gained greater trust, a greater sense of knowing that what was moving everything was actually guiding her, that she did not have to think ahead, that she was being guided just the way schools of fish and flocks of birds are guided without any leaders or any followers. And when that happened, in 20 minutes she was 25 feet back from the chart, seeing everything clearly, and her eyesight had improved 200% in very short order. So my experience about learning and about education and about creativity is that is our natural state. That is what's underlying everything. We didn't discuss what you were going to ask me.
No.
But, you asked a question, and you assume that the question came from you, and most of the listeners probably assume the same thing. But that question was subtly placed in your field of awareness when you weren't looking, and all of a sudden it came to you, and most people say, oh, I had a great thought. But where was it before you supposedly thought of it? It came to you as a gift. You shared that gift with me, and whatever placed that gift in your awareness, all of a sudden starts to download a response to that gift that you think, oh, that Jacob Liberman, he's really interesting, talks about this stuff. Has nothing to do with Jacob Liberman. I merely get to be a vessel at that moment for this miracle that we call life. I get to experience how what is moving the planets is animating this excitement inside of me right now. I don't know the words that are coming out of my mouth, but I have a feeling that whatever is coming through, which is causing me to feel an incredible sense of excitement and delight right now, hopefully will be contagious and will impact readers, listeners, and they'll say, wow. And that is what spurs our creativity. That's the contagious frequency of wellness that is continually breathing us, pumping our hearts, moving through us without any effort. And when we realize that, and we begin to just settle into that, it moves through us and it touches all of creation. And that creativity that is the excitement that I am experiencing now because of this lovely question that you asked, that creativity triggers that same creative spark within listeners, because I don't know exactly what just came out of me. You could say, oh, that's what we know by heart, but it's not even our own knowing. Right. It's the intelligence of life continually moving through all of us. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, learning becomes easy. Seeing becomes easy. And life, even though all of life has its difficulties built in, it becomes delightful much of the time. It's not so much about becoming enlightened. It's about having a delightful experience, a humbling, delightful experience. So that's a beginning for our conversation.
I think that's a wonderful beginning. Well, as I told you when we were talking before the interview, I have in front of me the only book I've got of yours, which is called Wisdom from an Empty Mind, which I actually got. Your son has signed it. It was at the BEA in New York when I was there. And the first, I have it earmarked all over the place, but the first one that I have, I really decided before I called you, like 30 seconds before, I'd like to have you at least comment on it. It says, what you see is what you get. And it's about, you talk about David Bohm and all matter is frozen light. And you go on and everything. And then, can I read this page, or do you want to talk about it first? Okay, all right.
You can read it.
Okay, I'll read it. What you see is what you get. Physicist David Bohm said all matter is frozen light, meaning that light and life are the same essence in two different states of existence. One is the formless, spiritual light we call God, and the other is the transformed expression of that godliness we call life. So how does light become life? How does formlessness miraculously alchemize into form? Quantum physics states that nothing exists without an observer, and the observer's point of view determines what is observed. In other words, what we see in the mind is what we get out there in the world. We create our experience of life from what we believe is real or unreal, and what we create is no accident. It is our highest intelligence, our godliness, mirroring back to us experiences that will expand our awareness and bring our consciousness to the next level. Many people believe that creation ended with the book of Genesis, but in fact, it is constantly occurring. Creation never ends. It is God's mind field, continually expressing itself as the heavens, earth, sun, moon, stars, and everything else that exists. I so love that, especially the part about creativity is still constantly happening. It's everywhere.
Right. I'm so happy that you read that, because even though that book is 14 years old now.
Oh, it's so good, though.
As you read it, I realized, the truth is timeless.
Mm-hmm.
Truth is timeless. It's not so much our perspective on something or our point of view, but what is it that funnels through us when we are just in this very open state? There are so many pieces of that piece that I would like to comment on.
Okay.
So essentially, as it says in their physicists state, that one's point of view actually creates or materializes the world, the experiences that they have. And basically that's based on some interesting experiments where if you are looking at subatomic particles like electrons or photons and so on, and if you choose to measure them with a machine that measures waves, it will measure waves. If you choose to measure them with a machine that measures particles, it will measure particles. And there was always a question, is light a particle or a wave?
Right.
And they noticed that whatever kind of machine you measured it with, it would measure that or the other. And so they came up with a machine that measured particles and waves, and it measured both simultaneously.
Yeah, that's
so
amazing.
what they gathered from that is however one is looking or measuring something, that is essentially what they're going to experience. Now, that in and of itself is fascinating. Of course, a lot of New Age, the New Age movement took that and said, well, we create our own reality, so if you change the way you're looking at things, then everything changes. And then, of course, the assumption is, well, you know, my mind, my life's experience, you can liken them to a remote control. So we can just change the channel by choosing something different.
Mm-hmm.
But very few people find that they get the parking space whenever they want it. I've never met anyone who gets what they want. Neither have I experienced that. What I've come to see is life doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we need, because everything is governed by the intelligence of life. And what we need is not always what feels incredible to us. That's why the ancient Chinese said crisis leads to opportunity. So, and if you look at the lives of all the people that pretty much all people agree reached a high state, whether it's Moses or Jesus or the Dalai Lama or Martin Luther King or anyone you want, or Ramana Maharshi, the most enlightened people, if you look at their lives, you discover something very quickly. They all share something in common. Do you know what that is?
Mm-mm. No.
They all had very difficult lives.
Uh-huh.
They all had very difficult lives. None of them had it easy and had life their way. No. What helped to support and form the greatness that we experience in them is the part of them that persevered and were resilient in the presence of life's difficulties. No one feels comfortable when a 10-pound weight falls on their foot, even though we say, well, I'm not in my body, but boy, that foot is swollen and hurts. No one is comfortable when we lose a loved one, or when we lose our money, or when we go to the doctor and unexpectedly get a diagnosis. No one says, oh, I'm just laying back and let go. No one. We all respond to those difficulties in precisely the same way. And so what for me is different, it's not about, so to come back to something we said about, well, if you just choose differently, then everything is different. And of course the assumption is we have free will. I can choose. How do we come to that? because we have this little voice inside of what we call the mind, which no one knows what that is anyway. And when things come up that we don't understand or we can't seem to handle easily, we begin this process. We call it thinking, where we try to solve the situation and come up with the answer where we're going to be right and we're going to have success. We're going to get a good grade.
Right.
The question is, first of all, is what we call thinking really thinking, or is it just worrying? And what I've come to realize is thinking doesn't come from us. It comes to us, free of charge, not in the form of thought, but in the form of epiphanies, huge awarenesses. And after we have them, we say, oh, look what I thought of. Because the ego wants ownership.
Right.
But actually, if we look at it, we'll realize it came to us free of charge. So what I have found from my work is almost everything we call thinking is actual worrying. And what is worrying? Worrying is when we encounter something in life that we don't have an answer to, which is pretty much everything.
Pretty much, yeah.
We immediately do this internal process. If it was an external process, we would call it cheating, like looking on someone else's paper to try to get the right answer. But we do it internally, so no one knows that we're rehearsing everything inside in hopes that when we actually do it in real time, we'll look good. We'll look like we have it together. We'll have our PowerPoint really maxed out so the presentation is perfect.
Right.
And that is what all of us do all day long. We go into life rehearsing internally because we're so worried that we want to get it right, and we don't realize that the is right actually right. And so first thing to realize is that worrying, which is what most thought really is, actually causes the breath to collapse and makes it impossible for the answer or the epiphany to come to us free of charge. That's why whenever we're thinking about something, we say, gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. But it doesn't jump off the tip of my tongue into the awareness until something is able to stop thinking about it.
Right.
Is able to sort of drop into a different place. So that's the first thing. The second thing is,
thank you so much for joining me here at Creativity, Thinking, and Education Podcast. Next week, we will finish this absolutely amazing conversation with Jacob Liberman. Please visit us at happyteachershappystudents.com. And if you find value in this podcast and the message that we are trying to spread, then click the subscribe button and give my show a review, hopefully a good one. I am so excited to be able to share the timeless awareness of all of our guests, and we have such a lineup coming up in the near future. Thank you so much again.